haven, preserving the eternal annals of Warhammer.
The galaxy was not silent, though to mortal ears it might have seemed so. Across the endless black, dying suns bled their last light into the void, their embers swallowed by shadows that stretched without end. Vast empires that had once thundered with pride and banners of conquest now lay broken, their ruins drifting like bone across the dark tide. The void itself seemed to mourn, whispering echoes of glories that had long since turned to ash. It was in this twilight of stars that the story begins, when the bonds of brotherhood still held, fragile yet radiant, before betrayal carved its wound across eternity. We speak to you now, listener of these memories. Know that you are cherished, that these words carry weight not only for the lost and the damned, but for you as well. Before we begin the descent into this tale, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what hour claims your sky? Hold that thought in your heart, for even across such distances, the bonds of voice and soul unite us. Now let us step into the past, where light first bent beneath the burden of oaths. The legions stood upon the blasted plain of Varos, their armour reflecting the dim light of a sun that flickered as though it too feared to endure. Towering, unyielding, they seemed as gods made manifest, each warrior bound not by flesh alone, but by an oath older than memory. They had conquered worlds, extinguished rebellions, and planted the standard of their empire in soil that had never known such dominion. Yet for all their strength, a shadow lingered among them, unseen but undeniable, like the crack in a statue that would one day split it in two. At their head stood the commander, his figure a silhouette against the fractured horizon. To those who followed, he was more than leader. He was the axis around which their faith revolved. His armour was blackened by war, but his eyes carried something weightier still. The burden of choices unmade, of futures glimpsed in restless dreams. He did not speak often, but when he did, the words fell like stone, shaping the thoughts of those who heard them. Even so, silence gnawed at him, a silence deeper than the void itself. He thought often of immortality. It was not promised, nor was it forbidden, but like a distant star it glimmered at the edges of his mind. To live beyond the span of flesh, to endure when all else crumbled, was that not a duty as much as a curse? Yet he felt the pull of it, subtle and relentless, as though time itself whispered his name, beckoning him to step outside its current. Still, he feared what it would cost. For what was eternity without trust, without the warmth of brothers whose laughter could pierce even the darkest campaign? The wind swept across Varos, carrying with it the stench of iron and old blood. The last rebellion of the Outer Rim had been crushed, the final fortress reduced to rubble. The commander's legions stood victorious, but their faces were carved from stone, devoid of triumph. Perhaps they knew, as he did, that victories now rang hollow. Each world won seemed less a step forward and more a step into shadow. A figure approached him through the haze. It was Carl, his most loyal brother in arms, whose devotion burned so brightly it often blinded him to doubt. Carl's armour bore scars deeper than most, and his voice carried the weight of countless battles survived together. "It is done," Carl said, lowering his blade. "The last of them fell before dawn. This world belongs to us now." The commander looked across the ruins, crumbling spires, shattered gates, the bones of a civilization scattered like seeds cast into barren soil. He felt no triumph, only the weight of inevitability pressing against his chest. "Does it?" he asked softly. Or does it belong to the silence that will claim it? Cal frowned but did not answer. He was not one for riddles, and he trusted too much to question. Yet behind him lingered another, Varian, the rival whose gaze never strayed far from the commander. Where Cal's loyalty burned, Varian's ambition smouldered. He had not spoken, but his silence was sharper than words. The commander felt it, as one feels a blade still sheathed but ready to strike. That night, they gathered in the ruins of the fortress to mark the end of the campaign. Fires burned in the shattered halls, casting long shadows across broken walls. The warriors feasted, their voices loud but their eyes wary. They laughed as brothers do, yet beneath it all lay something unspoken, a tension that hummed like the string of a bow pulled taut. The commander sat apart, his gaze fixed upon the flames. Immortality whispered again, rising from the fire's crackle, threading through the voices around him. He saw visions, endless stars, legions marching without end, his face unchanged as centuries turned to dust. He felt both awe and dread, as though eternity were a chalice placed before him, brimming with both salvation and poison. He longed to drink, and yet recoiled. Kyle lifted his cup in a toast. To the bonds that bind us, to the brotherhood that will never break. His voice was thunder, and the hall roared with it. For a moment, the commander allowed himself to believe. He looked upon their faces, scarred, weary, loyal, and felt the warmth of belonging. But when his eyes found Varian's, the warmth faltered. Varian did not raise his cup. His lips curved in something that might have been a smile, though it carried no joy. The feast waned, and one by one the fires died. The legions returned to their rest, armor clattering in the silence of night. The commander remained awake, his thoughts circling like vultures. He could not shake the image of Varian's stare, nor the whisper of eternity that lingered still. He wondered if the bonds that Cal toasted so fiercely were already fraying, threads stretched thin by pride, by envy, by the hungers of men who called themselves gods. As dawn broke, a pale and dying light spread across Veros. The sun seemed weaker than it had the day before, its glow choked by a shroud of cloud and smoke. The commander stood upon the wall of the ruined fortress, staring at the horizon. He knew the empire endured, vast and unyielding, yet he also knew its heart was fragile. Brother against brother, oath against oath. The fracture was not yet visible, but it was there, waiting. He clenched his hand into a fist. Duty demanded loyalty, but his heart wavered between love for those he led and the shadow of eternity that beckoned him. The bonds of brotherhood still held, yet even in their strength, he felt the first tremor of betrayal. Far away, a star collapsed into silence, and in that silence, the fate of the legions began to turn. The fires of Veros had cooled, leaving behind only the acrid breath of ruins. Ash drifted like snow across the empty plains, clinging to armor and banners that once gleamed with pride. The legions marched onward, their boots striking hollow against the broken earth. They did not speak, for silence weighed heavier than their steel. The war had been won, yet victory felt brittle, a vessel already cracked. The commander rode at their head, his gaze fixed not upon the road before him, but on the memories that would not let him rest. They came to a valley carved by forgotten rivers, where jagged cliffs rose on either side like sentinels of stone. Here the legion made camp, torches flickering against the dark. The men set down their burdens, sharpening blades and tending wounds, but even their rituals felt subdued, as though the air itself carried warning. The commander dismounted and walked alone. his shadow stretching across the firelit earth. Every step pressed him deeper into thought, for within him 2 truths warred: love for his brothers and the gnawing suspicion that those bonds could not endure eternity. Kale found him there, standing on the edge of the valley, staring into the dark. "You are too quiet," Kal said, his voice rough but steady. "Even for you." He set aside his helmet, revealing a face etched with scars of loyalty. "The men watch you. They need to know your spirit is unbroken." The commander did not turn. "Unbroken," he echoed, tasting the word like iron on his tongue. "Is that what they believe?" Kale stepped closer, his hand resting upon the commander's arm. "It is what they must believe. Doubt is a poison. Let it spread, and the legion will rot from within." The commander glanced at him, eyes heavy with shadows. "And what if the poison is already in the blood? What if the oaths we swore were not strong enough to bind us against what waits beyond?" Kale's brow furrowed, yet he did not flinch. "You speak of ghosts, of whispers in the dark. We are flesh, brother, forged by war and tempered in loyalty. Whatever shadow you fear, it cannot sever what has been bound by blood." The commander wished he could believe. He wished Kale's words could silence the unease that gnawed at his soul. Yet in the back of his mind, he saw Varian's face at the feast, the almost smile that concealed more than it revealed. That night, beneath a fractured sky, the commander summoned his inner circle. Carl was there, ever faithful. Varian too, silent but watchful. Others came, captains scarred from 100 campaigns, warriors who had bled together long enough to be called brothers. They gathered around the central fire, the flames twisting in the cold wind. The commander looked upon them and saw both strength and fragility. "We have conquered Varos," he said, his voice low, measured. "But conquest is not victory. Each world we take seems less a triumph and more a burden. Tell me, do you feel it? The weight pressing upon us?" Kyle answered first. "It is the cost of greatness. Every empire bears such weight. We carry it because none else can." Varian's gaze flickered across the firelight. "Or perhaps it is the weight of futility. What is empire, if each victory tastes of ash? Perhaps we march not toward glory, but toward oblivion." A murmur spread among the captains. The commander's eyes narrowed, but he held his tongue. It was Carl who struck back. "Oblivion. You speak like a coward, Varian. This empire will endure so long as we endure." Varian smiled, thin and sharp. "Will it? We are strong, yes, but strength bends beneath ambition. Tell me, Kyle, when the time comes that eternity is offered, will your oaths hold, or will you too grasp at immortality?" Kale rose to his feet, fury sparking in his eyes. "Immortality is a lie. We are men, not gods." "And yet gods we are becoming," Varian whispered, almost to himself. The words hung in the smoke, unsettling, unclean. The commander raised a hand, silencing them both. "Enough. This council is not for quarrel. It is for truth. I feel the fault lines within us, as one feels tremors before a quake. I ask you now, what binds us still? Is it loyalty, or is it only fear of falling alone?" No one answered. The fire crackled, filling the silence with its restless hiss. At last, Cal placed a fist over his chest. "I stand with you, always. Whatever shadows come, whatever eternity demands, I will not turn." Others echoed him, some with conviction, others with hesitation. Only Varian remained silent, his eyes reflecting the fire as though it burned only for him. The meeting ended without resolution, yet the unease deepened. That night the commander lay awake, staring at the stars through the ragged veil of clouds. Each one seemed dimmer as if the heavens themselves shared his doubt. He dreamed. In his dream, he stood alone upon a battlefield strewn with broken banners. His brothers lay around him, faces he knew and loved, yet their eyes were hollow, their lips silent. He reached for them, but they crumbled to ash in his hands. A voice rose from the void, neither kind nor cruel, whispering, "Eternity waits. Choose." He awoke, drenched in sweat, his breath ragged, the echo of the dream still coiled in his chest. When dawn came, the Legion marched again, banners snapping against the cold wind. They moved through barren plains where nothing grew, where only bones of past civilizations marked the path. The commander rode at their front, Kyle at his side, Varian a step behind. The rhythm of boots and drums echoed like a dirge, and in every beat the commander heard the inevitability of fracture. At midday they passed through the ruins of a city long abandoned. Towers lay broken, streets cracked, statues toppled and half buried in sand. The warriors looked upon it in silence, each perhaps imagining their own empire brought to such ruin. The commander halted, dismounting to stand before a shattered monument. The face carved in stone was eroded, unrecognizable, yet the weight of its forgotten glory pressed upon him. Varian spoke at last, his voice quiet but cutting. "This is what awaits all empires. No matter the oaths, no matter the Brotherhood, dust reclaims all." The commander's hand tightened on the hilt of his blade. "Not if we endure," he said. But even as the words left him, he felt the hollowness beneath them. Kyle looked between them, his expression heavy with worry. "Then we endure together," he said firmly. "That is all that matters." But as they left the ruins behind, the commander felt the fracture widen. Loyalty had been sworn, but silence carried doubt. Varian's words lingered like poison, and Karl's devotion seemed fragile against the weight of what was to come. The road stretched on, endless, and with each step the bonds of brotherhood bent closer to breaking. The sun dipped low, casting the valley in long shadows. The commander rode in silence, his thoughts consumed by a single truth. Love bound them still, but love alone could not hold against eternity. And in that space between oath and doubt, betrayal took root. Night returned heavy and suffocating, a shroud over the valley where the Legion had made camp. Fires flickered weakly, their glow drowned by a sky of fractured stars. The men slept uneasily, shifting in their armor, blades never far from reach. The commander sat awake beneath a dying tree at the edge of the camp, his gaze fixed on the heavens as if searching for something that would not show itself. The whispers had grown louder since Veros, threads of sound woven into the silence, carrying promises of eternity. They pressed against his skull, subtle as breath yet sharp as knives, and he could not banish them. Kyle approached quietly, as he always did, loyalty carrying him even where rest should have. "You do not sleep," he said, lowering himself beside his commander. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the concern that never left him. The men sense it. They wonder if you dream of darker things. The commander's lips tightened. "Dreams are a poor map for the living." He paused, then added, "And yet they cling to me like chains. I see us, Kyle. I see us broken. I see you lying silent in dust, and I am left alone with the taste of ashes." Kyle looked into the fire, jaw clenched. "Dreams are lies of the mind. You must not give them weight. We are still here. We are still together. That is all that matters." But even as he said it, a sound carried across the night, low, sibilant, as though someone spoke from the void itself. The commander stiffened, and Kale's hand went to his sword. The sound faded, yet its echo lingered in their bones. Neither spoke of it, but both knew it had not been born of wind. At dawn, the legion moved again, their banners dragging behind them as though reluctant to rise. The land they crossed was barren, scarred by wars long forgotten. They came to a chasm black and fathomless, a wound cut deep into the earth. The bridge across it was ancient, its stones worn smooth by centuries, its arches trembling in the cold wind. As they crossed, the commander felt the whispers surge, rising from the depths like serpents of sound. His vision blurred, and for a heartbeat he saw not stone beneath his feet, but the bones of countless warriors, their mouths open in silent screams. He staggered. Kyle's hand steadied him, though he said nothing. Behind them, Varian's eyes gleamed in the half-light, and his voice carried low. The void speaks to you, does it not? You hear it, as I do. The commander turned sharply, but Varian's expression was unreadable, carved of shadow and intent. He wanted to demand answers, to crush the implication before it could root, but the legion pressed onward, and the moment passed like smoke in wind. By evening, they reached a plateau where the ruins of another fortress jutted from the rock. Its towers leaned as though weary, its gates broken long ago. The men entered cautiously, torches cutting through dust and silence. They made camp in the hollow of its halls, the walls echoing with sounds too old to name. That night, the whispers came again, not faint this time, but strong, layered, 1,000 voices folded into one. They spoke not in words but in visions, stars collapsing, empires burning, his brothers turning their blades inward, and always the promise, eternity, waiting, if only he would claim it. The commander awoke drenched in cold sweat, his breath shallow. He stumbled into the courtyard where the night air was sharp, trying to steady himself. There he found Varian waiting, as though he too had been summoned by the same unseen hand. You hear it, Varian said softly, his voice almost reverent. The call of what lies beyond. You cannot deny it. The commander's eyes narrowed. And if I do, if I bury it in silence? Varian stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the stones. You cannot bury the truth. You can only choose whether to accept it or be crushed beneath it. Immortality is not curse but destiny. We march toward it whether we will or no. Better to seize it than be left behind when others do. The commander's hand brushed the hilt of his blade. And what of loyalty? What of the brotherhood we swore to uphold? Will eternity mean nothing if we stand alone? Varian's smile was thin, his eyes gleaming like knives. Brotherhood is the lie we tell ourselves to endure the present. Eternity is the truth that waits at the end. When the choice comes, you will see. You will stand where I stand now. The words cut deep, not because they were foreign, but because they echoed the whispers already gnawing at the commander's mind. He wanted to strike Varian down then, to silence both him and the voices forever. But he did not. He turned away, though the weight of Varian's gaze followed him like a shadow. When dawn broke, the legion prepared to march again, though unease clung to them like frost. The commander watched his men, their movements heavy, their eyes clouded. He wondered how many of them had heard the whispers, how many dreamt of eternity in silence, too afraid to confess it. Perhaps betrayal had already begun, not with blades, but with thoughts. Kyle came to him, his armor still scarred from the last war. There is unrest, he said. The men feel it. They look to you for strength, yet your silence gives them only questions. The commander met his gaze. And what would you have me give them? Lies of certainty, or the truth that I myself cannot master? Kale's expression hardened. Give them hope. Give them something to believe in, even if you no longer believe it yourself. That is your duty. That is the burden of command. The words struck harder than any blade. The commander nodded, but inside the storm raged louder. Hope, he thought, a fragile thing, too easily broken. And when it shattered, what would remain? Only eternity, waiting with open hands. As the legion marched once more, the land stretched endless and empty before them. The commander rode at the front, Karl to his right, Varian to his left. The sun bled low across the horizon, staining the sky crimson. In that light, the whispers rose again, clear and terrible. They spoke of choices, of oaths unmade, of brothers turning against each other with blades bared. And in their echo, the commander felt the first true fracture in his soul. He did not know when the breaking would come, only that it was inevitable. The Brotherhood still marched as one, but already he could see the shadows pulling them apart. And in the hollow silence between each heartbeat, the voices whispered, eternity, betrayal, choose. The fortress rose before them like the husk of some great beast, its towers broken, its gates fallen inward, its halls echoing with the memory of war long past. The legion entered cautiously, their torches breathing light into cracks, where the night had nested for centuries. The commander walked at the front, each step stirring dust that had lain untouched for generations. To his men, it was shelter. To him, it was a mausoleum. He felt the weight of its silence pressing down, as though the walls themselves remembered betrayal. They set fires in the great hall, feeding the long dead hearths with fresh wood. The flames rose, painting the crumbling stone in hues of gold and crimson. Banners were hung, goblets filled, and meat roasted until the air was thick with smoke and spice. For a moment, it seemed as though triumph had returned. Warriors laughed, clashed cups, and sang songs of campaigns past. They celebrated not the fall of Varos nor the ruin of the Outer Rim, but the fact that they still stood together. The commander sat at the head of the feast, Kale to his right, Varian to his left. He drank sparingly, his thoughts heavier than the cup in his hand. Around him, the voices of his brothers swelled like a tide, but to his ears they were faint, as though already distant. He watched Kale laugh, the sound bold and unbroken, and for an instant he envied that certainty. Then his eyes found Varian, whose smile never touched his gaze, and the envy curdled into unease. As the feast grew loud, Karl rose, lifting his goblet high. "Brothers," he thundered, his voice carrying through the hall. "Tonight we stand as one. We have broken the last chains of rebellion, and the stars themselves bend to our march, to the bonds that bind us, to the brotherhood that will never break." The hall roared in answer, cups clashing, blades raised in salute. The commander lifted his goblet as well, but the motion felt hollow, his hand heavy with doubt. When the voices quieted, Varian stood. His movements were smooth, deliberate, his presence commanding even in silence. He raised his cup, though he did not smile. "To bonds, yes," he said softly, the words sharp as glass. "But let us not forget that bonds are tested in fire. Oaths are strong until the moment they are weighed against eternity. Tell me, my brothers, when the choice comes, will you cling to loyalty, or will you reach for the power that endures when all else fades?" A hush fell over the hall. The laughter died. The torches seemed to gutter. The commander felt every eye turn to Varian, and then to him, as though awaiting his judgment. Kale's hand tightened on the hilt of his blade, his face dark with fury. "You speak of shadows at a feast of triumph," Kale spat. What poison do you pour into their ears? Varian's gaze did not falter. I speak of truth. The whispers come to us all, whether we admit them or not. Do you not hear them? Do they not stir in your dreams? The void calls, promising eternity. Deny it if you wish, but you cannot silence what already stirs in your blood. The commander's chest tightened. He wanted to rise, to silence Varian with the weight of command, but the words froze on his tongue. For Varian's voice echoed what he himself had heard, what he himself feared to confess. The whispers had grown louder with each passing night, and now they spoke through his brother's mouth. Cal slammed his goblet down, the sound echoing like a hammer blow. Eternity is a curse. We are men, bound to time, and it is enough. Speak again of forsaking our oaths, and you will find my blade in your throat. A murmur swept through the captains, some nodding with Kale, others shifting uneasily as though Varian's words had found their mark. The commander rose slowly, his presence alone enough to still the hall. Enough, he said, his voice quiet, yet carrying. This is a night of unity. I will not see it broken by whispers of what may come. We drink to brotherhood, nothing more. The tension eased, but not wholly. The feast resumed, though the laughter was thinner now, the songs less certain. The commander returned to his seat, but the weight of Varian's words pressed upon him like chains. He looked upon the faces of his brothers and wondered how many of them already dreamt of eternity. As the night deepened, he withdrew to the balcony overlooking the ruins. The air was sharp, the sky veiled by thin clouds that glowed faintly with the dying light of distant stars. He stood alone, the sounds of the feast muted behind him, and for a moment he let the silence consume him. And then, faint as breath, the whispers came again. They spoke not in words, but in visions. He saw Kale, bloodied, lying upon a field of broken banners. He saw Varian, standing triumphant, his face ageless, his eyes hollow. He saw himself, caught between them, torn by love and betrayal, unable to choose. And always the promise lingered, eternity, waiting, if he would only claim it. He gripped the stone railing until his knuckles whitened. His heart thundered, not with fear, but with the unbearable weight of choice. He could not tell if the vision was warning or prophecy, but he felt its truth pressing against him like a blade. A voice stirred behind him. You saw it, did you not? Varian stepped into the moonlight, his figure tall, his eyes gleaming with certainty. The whispers show us what will be. They cannot be denied. The commander turned, anger rising. They show us nothing but ruin. Varian shook his head slowly. They show us the path. Brotherhood will break. It always does. Only those who claim eternity will endure beyond it. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I would have you with me, brother. When the moment comes, stand with me, and together we will rise above the dust of empires. The commander's hand moved instinctively to his sword, though he did not draw it. He searched Varian's eyes and saw no hesitation, no doubt, only the cold fire of conviction. For a heartbeat, he feared that Varian had already chosen, that betrayal had already begun. Kale's voice shattered the moment. He burst onto the balcony, his face dark with fury. What treachery is this? Whispering in shadows, sowing doubt at a feast of unity. Varian turned to him, calm as stone. You mistake truth for treachery, Kale. You always have. Kale's hand flew to his weapon, but the commander stepped between them. Enough, he commanded, his voice sharp. You will not turn this night to blood. The two men glared at one another over his shoulders, hatred smouldering where once there had been brotherhood. The commander felt the fracture widen, a crack too deep to be healed by oaths or feasts. He knew then that the bond they had toasted so fiercely was already breaking. Inside, the hall roared again with false laughter, but out here, beneath the dying stars, the first true betray had been spoken. And though no blade was drawn, something precious had been severed forever. The dawn after the feast came cold and grey, the sky veiled in ash that dulled the light of the sun. The fortress, once alive with song and laughter, now stood hollow, its walls echoing only with the scrape of armour and the shuffle of weary boots. The commander rose before the others, walking the length of the ruined courtyard, his steps stirring echoes that seemed to belong to another age. He had not slept. The whispers had denied him rest, carrying into his dreams the same visions of betrayal and eternity. When the men stirred, their voices were quieter than before. The feast had left them not with unity, but unease. Eyes flicked sideways at one another, searching for weakness, for signs of where loyalty ended and ambition began. The commander felt it like a weight pressing down upon his chest. Brotherhood still stood, but it swayed as a tower sways when its foundation begins to crack. Carl approached him at the edge of the courtyard, his expression grim, his hand resting against the hilt of his blade as though the gesture gave him strength. "You should have silenced Varian," Cale said, without preamble. "The poison he spreads will not vanish with the morning. Words are seeds, and his have taken root." The commander's jaw tightened. "If I strike him down for words alone, then I prove him right. That loyalty is nothing more than fear." Carl's eyes burned. "Better to prove him right with steel than let him fracture us with shadows. The men look to you, and they see hesitation. That hesitation will kill us." The commander turned away, staring out across the barren plain beyond the walls. "You would have me slaughter my brother for fear of what he might become?" Kyle's voice softened, though the steel within it remained. "I would have you protect the Legion, whatever the cost. I swore my oath to you, but if you falter, if you allow Varian's whispers to grow, then all of us will bleed for it. Choose wisely, for every moment you delay is another moment the fracture deepens." The commander did not answer. He walked away, though Cale's words clung to him like chains. Later, he found Varian alone in the shattered library of the fortress. Dust lay thick upon broken shelves, tomes turned to ash by time, yet Varian stood among them as though he belonged to the silence. When the commander entered, Varian did not bow, did not avert his gaze. Instead, he closed his fist around a fragment of stone etched with symbols too old to name. "You have come," Varian said quietly. "I wondered if you would." The commander stepped closer, the sound of his boots hollow on the cracked floor. "What are you doing here?" "Listening," Varian replied, setting the stone back upon the shelf. "This place remembers. Its walls hum with the weight of eternity. Do you not hear it? The voices that sing from the dark? They are louder here than anywhere else. It is as though the ruin itself speaks." The commander felt the whispers stir, rising within the silence. He clenched his hands, forcing himself to stillness. "You twist shadows into prophecy," he said. "You mistake your own hunger for destiny." Varian's lips curved faintly, though it was not a smile. "And you mistake fear for wisdom. You hear them as I do, yet you deny them because you fear the truth of their promise. Eternity waits, brother. It will not be denied. You can chain yourself to loyalty if you wish, but chains break. Power does not." The commander's temper flared, his hand brushing the hilt of his blade. For a moment he considered it, ending this shadow here and now, silencing Varian's voice before it could carry further. But again he stayed his hand. Something in Varian's calm unnerved him, as though the man had already seen this choice made in another time, and knew the blade would not fall. "You walk a dangerous path," the commander said at last, "one that leads not to eternity, but to ruin." Varian met his gaze without flinching. "Perhaps ruin is the crucible from which eternity is born." The commander left him there, though the words followed like smoke. That evening, as the men gathered in the courtyard to prepare for departure, the first true fracture revealed itself. A fight broke out between two captains, brothers who had fought side by side for decades. One accused the other of faltering in loyalty, of whispering Varian's truths in secret. Blades were drawn before the commander arrived to pull them apart. Their voices rang through the courtyard, bitter and raw. "He has poisoned us," one cried. "I will not march beside a traitor." "I am no traitor," the other spat, blood running down his cheek. "But I will not close my ears to the truth. Why do you fear eternity so greatly, unless you know your oaths are too weak to withstand it?" The men fell silent, watching. The commander stood between them, his presence heavy as stone. He ordered them apart, but he knew in his heart that this was only the beginning. The seed Varian had sown had sprouted, and no command could tear its roots from the soil. That night, Kyle came to him again. His face was shadowed by torchlight, his voice low but fierce. "Do you see now? Already brothers turn upon each other. Soon blades will not stop at quarrels. Varian must be silenced, or the Legion will fall before the true enemy ever strikes." The commander stared at the fire, its flames writhing like serpents in the wind. He thought of the captain's fury, of Varian's words in the library, of the visions that gnawed at him night after night. His heart wavered, torn between the love that still bound him to his brothers and the whispers that promised something beyond love, beyond loyalty, beyond mortality itself. He rose and walked to the edge of the fortress wall, looking out at the endless dark of the plain. The stars above were faint, their light smothered by clouds. He wondered if they too whispered to one another, or if they simply burned until silence consumed them. Behind him, Kyle's footsteps echoed, steady and unwavering. "Make your choice," Kyle said quietly. "For every moment you hesitate, you risk all of us. I will follow you into death if need be, but I will not watch this Legion rot because you refuse to see what must be done." The commander closed his eyes. In the silence, the whispers surged once more, louder now, almost triumphant. They spoke of destiny, of eternity, of betrayal already written in the marrow of his bones. He did not answer Kale, for he could not. He was bound between two truths, each heavy with ruin, and somewhere deep within, he knew the time of silence was ending. The next step would not be in shadows or whispers, but in blood. The march resumed at dawn, the fortress shrinking behind them into shadow as the banners of the Legion caught the pale wind. The land they entered was vast and barren, a plain scarred by forgotten wars, where the bones of old armies jutted from the soil like accusations. Each step of the march seemed to echo louder than it should, as if the earth itself listened to them pass. The commander rode at the front, silent, his thoughts tangled with Kyle's warnings and Varian's whispers. The men followed, but their unity was frayed. Eyes shifted sideways, voices spoke softer, and suspicion trailed behind them like a second shadow. The burden of command weighed upon him more heavily than his armor. Every order given felt hollow, every decision another stone upon his chest. He had led them through 1,000 campaigns, through fire and famine, through victories carved in blood, yet never had he felt so divided within himself. His heart beat with love for his brothers, for the oaths they had sworn, but his mind drowned in the whispers of eternity. To lead them now meant to choose a path he no longer believed in, and he feared that his hesitation showed in every word, every glance. Kyle remained close, always vigilant, his presence a wall of loyalty against the tide of uncertainty. He spoke little, but his silence was not that of doubt. It was the silence of a man who had already chosen, who would stand firm until the end. To the commander, Kyle was both anchor and mirror, proof of what certainty looked like, and the reminder of what he had lost. Varian too was never far, his gaze sharp, his smile faint, his words few but heavy. He did not need to preach openly. His silence itself seemed to sow unease. The men glanced at him with both fear and fascination, as though he carried secrets they longed to deny, yet could not resist imagining. The commander felt Varian's presence like a blade at his back, constant, patient, waiting for the moment when it might be drawn. By midday, they reached the ruins of an ancient city half buried in dust. Its streets lay cracked and broken, its towers leaning like drunkards, its gates collapsed. Statues without faces loomed over the silence, their stone eyes long since eroded by time. The Legion entered cautiously, their boots stirring echoes that seemed too eager to answer. The commander ordered the men to halt and rest, for the march had been long and their strength was waning. Fires were lit, rations shared, and the sound of hammer against blade rang through the broken streets. The commander stood at the heart of the city, staring at the shattered monument of a long-dead king. The crown was broken, the figure's hand clutching a sword now snapped in half. He traced the cracks with his eyes, and in them he saw the reflection of his own brotherhood, fractured but not yet fallen. He wondered if this city too had once toasted loyalty, had once sworn bonds that would never break, only to crumble beneath the weight of time and betrayal. A messenger approached, bowing low. "Two captains quarrel in the southern quarter, my lord. Their men gather at their sides. It may turn to blood if you do not intervene." The commander went swiftly, Kale at his flank. There he found the quarrel already near the edge of violence. One captain shouting accusations of treachery, the other spitting defiance, their soldiers circling like wolves. The commander stepped between them, his voice thundering through the square. "Enough!" His command silenced them, though their hatred did not fade. He looked into their eyes and saw fear disguised as fury. Fear of betrayal, fear of eternity, fear that the bond holding them together was no stronger than the stone beneath their feet. He ordered both captains stripped of command for the night, their men disbanded to other cohorts. But as he turned away, he knew it was not a solution, only a reprieve. The poison had spread too deeply. Each quarrel was a symptom of the fracture widening. That night, as the Legion camped among the ruins, the commander stood alone in the shadow of the broken palace. The whispers came again, louder than ever, their voices layered and insistent. They told him that loyalty was a chain that would drag him into dust, that eternity was the only crown worth bearing, that love for his brothers was a weakness that would kill them all. He pressed his hands to his temples, trying to drive them out, but the visions came unbidden. Kyle lying dead at his feet, Varian standing ageless in the fire, the Legion torn apart by their own blades. He gasped and staggered, gripping the stone wall to steady himself. A voice broke the silence, and he turned to find Kyle there, his face grim but not unkind. "You hear them again," Kyle said. It was not a question. The commander closed his eyes. "They do not stop. They show me ruin. They show me you. Gone. His voice faltered. I do not know how to fight what I cannot strike with steel. Kyle stepped closer, laying a hand upon his shoulder. Then fight with will. Fight with the loyalty we swore. Do not give them space to root in your heart. You are our commander. If you fall, we all fall. The commander met his gaze, and for a moment he found strength in Kale's certainty. Yet even as he nodded, he knew the whispers would return, and that loyalty alone might not be enough to silence them. Later, as the fires burned low, Varian sought him. The commander was weary, but he did not send him away. Varian's eyes gleamed in the torchlight, calm, certain. You cannot bear it much longer, he said. The weight of command will crush you as it crushed every empire before. But there is another way. The whispers are not lies. They are the truth of what lies beyond. Accept them, and the burden will vanish. You will not fear betrayal, for eternity answers to none but itself. The commander's anger flared, but it was dulled by exhaustion. And what of Kale? What of the men who trust us to lead them? Varian's lips curved faintly. They will follow, or they will break. Brotherhood was never meant to last forever, but eternity endures. The commander turned from him, unwilling to hear more. Yet the words clung to him like smoke, impossible to banish. The night deepened, and the ruins seemed to breathe with unseen life. The commander stood alone once more, staring at the stars smothered by a cloud. The burden of command pressed heavier than ever, crushing the certainty from his heart. He wondered how much longer he could carry it before it crushed him entirely. And in the silence between heartbeats, he knew that when the breaking came, it would not be at the hands of his enemies, but by the hands of those he called brothers. The march from the ruined city began beneath a sky of iron, heavy clouds pressing low, smothering what little light remained. The legion moved as a single body, but the rhythm was uneven, the unity fraying with every mile. Their banners hung limp in the still air, as though even the wind had abandoned them. The commander rode in silence, his eyes sweeping the column, seeing not strength but cracks. Men who avoided one another's gaze, whispers traded in low tones, captains whose shoulders sagged beneath invisible burdens. The land they entered was desolate, scarred by forgotten fire. Black stones stretched to the horizon, fractured into jagged ridges. No birds flew above, no life stirred below. It was a place that seemed to remember war even when the warriors themselves had been reduced to dust. The commander felt it in his bones, the echo of battles long ended yet never forgotten. Each step forward seemed to drag them deeper into that memory, as though the land itself were drawing them into its wound. At dusk, the legion made camp upon a plateau. Fires were lit, but their flames did not comfort. They flickered uncertainly, as if afraid to burn too brightly. The commander stood apart, his gaze fixed on the horizon where storms gathered. The sky was bruised with violet and crimson, lightning crawling like veins across its surface. He thought of it as a mirror of his brotherhood, storm clouds of betrayal swelling, thunder waiting to fall. Kyle came to him, his armor darkened with dust, his face stern. The men whisper more openly now, he said. They speak of Varian. Some claim he is touched by destiny. Others call him a serpent in our midst. None speak of unity. The commander's voice was low. And what do you call him? Kyle's hand tightened on the hilt at his side. I call him danger. A danger that grows with every hour you let him walk among us. If you do not end it, he will. The commander looked at Kyle, and for a moment he envied his clarity, the unshakable conviction in his voice. but clarity felt impossible. To strike Varian down might silence him, yet it would also fracture the Legion outright. To leave him alive was to invite betrayal. Between the two paths, ruin seemed inevitable. As night deepened, a cry split the camp. The commander rushed to its source, Kyle at his side. They found two warriors locked in combat, their blades flashing in the firelight. One accused the other of blasphemy, of swearing himself to Varian's whispered truth. The other roared back that eternity was the only path worth walking, that the oaths of Brotherhood were chains meant to break. Blood stained the earth before they could be separated. The commander stood above them, his presence forcing silence. He declared the quarrel ended, but he saw in the men's eyes that no words could undo what had begun. For the first time, brother had spilled brother's blood, not in jest, not in accident, but in anger born of belief. The fracture was no longer hidden. It had broken the surface. Varian appeared then, stepping into the circle of firelight. His face was calm, his voice soft, but every word cut sharp. This is not the end. It is only the beginning. You can feel it, can you not? The old oaths crumble because they are too fragile to endure what is coming. Eternity waits for those willing to grasp it. The rest will drown in their own loyalty. The men stirred, some with anger, some with hunger. Kyle's blade half drew, but the commander raised a hand to halt him. He met Varian's gaze, and in that gaze he saw no hesitation, only conviction so deep it threatened to swallow the uncertain. Enough, the commander said, though his voice was heavy. You will not turn brother against brother in my camp. Varian inclined his head slightly, though his eyes still gleamed. It is not I who turns them. It is truth. I merely give voice to what already stirs in their hearts. The commander dismissed him, but the damage was done. That night, sleep eluded the camp. Some whispered prayers to forgotten gods. Others sharpened their blades as though expecting war, not from without but within. The commander lay awake, listening to the restless silence, his heart pounding with the certainty that his legion was unraveling. Before dawn, the storm broke. Lightning tore across the horizon, thunder shaking the plateau. Rain lashed down, turning the ground to mud, drowning the fires in hiss and smoke. The legion stood in disarray, their banners whipping wildly in the wind. And amid the chaos, word spread. A supply train had been sabotaged, its wagons burned, its guardians slain. The commander gathered his captains in the storm, their faces shadowed by rain and fear. Who did this? One demanded. No enemy stalks these wastes. It was one of our own. Suspicion spread like fire. Fingers pointed, voices rose. Some accused the faction who had quarrelled the night before. Others whispered Varian's name with both dread and awe. Kyle stood ready, his hand never leaving his blade, his fury barely contained. The commander silenced them with a roar, but in his heart he knew the truth. The sabotage was not an accident. It was the first deliberate act of betrayal. Whether born of fear, ambition, or whispered promises, it was a blade drawn against the Brotherhood itself. When the council dispersed, Kyle followed him into the storm. His voice cut through the rain. How much longer will you wait? Each day you delay, he grows stronger. If you do not end him, he will end us all. The commander turned on him, anger flashing. Do you think I do not know? Do you think I do not feel the fracture in every breath I take? He drew closer, his voice breaking. But if I kill him, I kill more than a man. I kill the belief of those who already look to him. And if I spare him, I invite betrayal. Tell me, Kyle, what choice remains to me that does not lead to ruin? Kyle's eyes softened, but his words did not. The choice to protect us, even if it damns you, that is the burden of command. The storm raged around them, rain soaking armor, thunder rolling across the dark. The commander looked into Kale's face, into the loyalty that still shone there, and felt the crushing weight of it. For Kale would follow him into fire, would die for him without hesitation. And it was that loyalty which made the whispers most terrible, for they promised him that one day he would see Kale's loyalty broken. His blood spilled upon the earth. As dawn struggled through the storm, the commander stood alone upon the ridge, his cloak torn by wind, his heart heavy. He looked upon his legion and no longer saw unity. He saw factions waiting to break, brothers waiting to betray, love waiting to turn to hate. And in the thunder's roar, he heard the whispers again, louder now, almost triumphant. The oath is broken. The end has begun. The storm had passed, leaving the world sodden and scarred. The plateau was a mire of mud and ash, the banners of the legion clinging heavy to their poles. Fires were rekindled with difficulty, and the air stank of wet iron. The men moved sluggishly, their eyes hollow from the long night, their trust in one another worn thin as the fabric of their cloaks. The commander walked among them in silence, his presence alone enough to keep discipline intact. But he could feel it. Unity was no longer born of brotherhood, only of fear of his gaze. By noon they descended from the plateau and marched into a valley where mountains loomed on either side, jagged peaks veined with black stone. The wind moaned through the rocks, carrying with it a sound that resembled whispers. The commander felt them even here, threading through the air, promises and threats entwined. He pressed onward, but every mile deepened his certainty that the storm had not ended. It had only changed its form. Scouts returned at dusk with grim tidings. An enemy host had been sighted beyond the northern ridge. Raiders, scattered remnants of a once great foe, drawn by the weakness of the legion as carrion is drawn to blood. They numbered fewer than the legion, but they were swift, merciless, and desperate. The commander gathered his captains beneath the shadow of the mountains. Rain still clung to their armor, water dripping from their cloaks. "We will meet them here," the commander declared. His voice was steady, but within he felt only the dread of inevitability. "The valley narrows to the north. They will come through it. We will break them against the stone." Kyle nodded, resolute as always. "We have the strength. One more victory, and the men will remember who they are." But Varian's voice cut through the council, low and calm, yet sharper than a blade. "Or one more victory will only delay the end. Why do you cling to these old wars, brother? Why fight as though loyalty binds us still, when you know it frays with every step? Better to claim eternity than to squander lives in battles that do not matter." The captains stirred uneasily. Some looked at Varian with anger, others with something darker, temptation. The commander's hand curled into a fist, but he did not answer. Instead, he dismissed the council and turned away, unwilling to reveal the storm that already raged within him. The enemy came with the dawn. From the northern pass they poured, howling, armored in scraps, wielding blades scavenged from dead empires. They came with fury and hunger, and the valley rang with the clash of steel and the cries of the dying. The commander led from the front, his blade a storm, his presence unshakable. The legion roared with him, their formation holding firm against the tide. For a moment, it felt as though unity had returned, forged anew in blood and necessity. But beneath the surface, betrayal stirred. Orders were delayed, shields shifted too slowly, gaps opened where once there had been none. The commander felt it in the rhythm of the battle. Hesitation where there should have been certainty. Doubt where there should have been trust. He fought harder, his voice thundering across the din, driving the men back into formation. Yet even as they obeyed, he knew the fracture had reached the heart of the fight. Kale was everywhere, his blade flashing, his voice rallying those who faltered. He fought as though the oath still meant everything, as though nothing could sever it. The commander's heart ached at the sight, for he knew Kale's faith was the last anchor holding them together. And then came the moment. In the heart of the battle, as the enemy pressed with renewed fury, a cohort on the left flank broke. Not from weakness, but from choice. They turned, abandoning their brothers, retreating into the shadow of the rocks. The line shuddered, threatened to collapse. The enemy surged into the gap, cutting down men who shouted in fury and disbelief. The commander fought his way to the breach, his blade rising and falling, blood spraying across his armor. He roared for the flank to hold, but the deserters did not return. Their absence was louder than any cry. Carl appeared at his side, his face grim, blood streaked across his cheek. "They betrayed us," he shouted over the clash. "Our own brothers, gone." The commander's heart broke with the words, but there was no time for grief. He drove forward, rallying the line, filling the breach with his own fury. The enemy faltered beneath his wrath, their charge breaking against his relentless strike. Slowly, painfully, the tide turned. By dusk, the valley floor was choked with corpses. The enemy shattered, their remnants fleeing into the mountains. Victory had been won, but it felt like loss. The men stood over the dead in silence, their armor dented, their eyes empty. The deserters did not return. Their absence was a wound deeper than any blade could carve. As the fires were lit and the wounded tended, Carl came to the commander's tent, his face etched with both sorrow and fury. "It is done," he said. "The Brotherhood has broken. No enemy could defeat us, but betrayal has. What will you do now?" The commander sat in silence, staring at his blood-stained gauntlets. He felt hollow, as though the battle had carved something out of him that could never be restored. "I do not know," he whispered at last. "I led them with love, with loyalty, with hope that our bonds were stronger than eternity's call. But now, I wonder if I led them only to ruin." Kyle's hand struck the table. "No, you cannot think this way. We are not all broken. Some of us still stand. I still stand. You cannot surrender us to despair." The commander lifted his eyes, meeting Kale's gaze. In them he saw unshakable devotion, fierce and unwavering. And yet behind it, he saw the shadow of inevitability, the vision the whispers had shown him. Kel fallen in dust, his loyalty shattered by betrayal's blade. Before he could answer, Varian entered. He did not bow, did not wait for permission. He stepped into the tent as though it belonged to him, his presence heavy, his gaze unflinching. "You see it now," Varian said softly. "The oath is broken. Brothers have turned, and more will follow. You cannot save them with loyalty. You cannot bind them with love. Only eternity remains. Take it, and rise above this ruin, or be crushed beneath it." The commander rose slowly, his hand trembling at his side. He wanted to strike Varian down, to silence his voice forever, yet he did not, for the truth was this. Part of him believed. Part of him longed for the promise of eternity, to escape the weight of betrayal and the burden of command. Cal's blade hissed from its sheath. He placed himself between them, his voice a growl. "Leave, Varian, or I will end you here." Varian's lips curved faintly. though his eyes were cold. "You cannot end me, not when the commander himself does not will it." He turned, his cloak trailing through the mud, and left without another word. The commander stood in the silence that followed, his heart torn between Carl's loyalty and Varian's conviction. He looked upon his men outside, weary and broken, their brotherhood fractured beyond repair, and he knew that the battle in the valley had not ended their war. It had only begun it. The whispers surged again, louder than ever. "The Brotherhood is dust. Eternity awaits." The fires of the battlefield had cooled, yet the smoke lingered in the valley like a ghost that would not depart. The Legion remained, but their silence was heavier than the corpses strewn around them. They moved with the weariness of men carrying not just armor and wounds, but betrayal. The deserters had not returned, and their absence was an open wound across every face. The commander stood alone upon a ridge, watching the horizon fade into dusk, his heart thunderous with the knowledge that no enemy had broken them, only themselves. Night fell, and with it, whispers spread through the camp like a sickness. Men gathered in quiet circles, speaking in tones too low to carry, their eyes flickering toward Varian as though fearing and worshipping him in equal measure. The commander felt their unease like a pulse beneath his skin. He summoned his captains, and though they came, their unity was shattered. Each man stood apart, suspicion alive in their gaze. Carl broke the silence first, his voice edged with fury. "We must name them traitors. Those who deserted us are no longer brothers. They are dead to us. Let us purge their names and march on." Others muttered agreement, but one captain shook his head. "If we do so, we declare that the bond means nothing." Perhaps they left not from treachery, but from despair. Perhaps they saw truth in Varian's words. The hall erupted with argument, loyalty clashing against doubt, love against hunger for survival. The commander silenced them with a raised hand, but even his authority felt diminished, his words no longer the stone they once were. That night, the whispers came to him again, relentless. He saw the deserters alive, their armor remade, their eyes burning with a light not of mortal flame. He saw Cale standing against them, sword raised, his loyalty turned into doom, and he saw Varian in their midst, ageless, untouched by time, his gaze fixed upon him with the certainty of destiny. He awoke gasping, the vision seared into his mind. He walked into the camp, past the fires, past the weary men, until he found Cale sharpening his blade. The commander sat beside him, his voice low. "If it comes to it, Cale, if brother must stand against brother, will you strike?" Cale looked at him, eyes fierce yet sorrowful. "If they are no longer brothers, then yes. My oath is to you, to the Legion, as it was meant to be. I will fight, even if it means killing those I once loved." The commander closed his eyes, feeling both the weight of Cale's loyalty and the horror of its consequence. To demand such sacrifice was to demand the death of what little remained of their bond. Yet he knew the moment approached when such a choice would no longer be avoidable. At dawn, a messenger arrived, battered and breathless. The deserters had been seen. They had not fled into exile, but into alliance with old enemies who still stalked the wastes. Together, they now formed a host greater than the one the Legion had crushed. And at their head, the messenger swore, marched Varian himself, cloaked in shadow, the deserters bowing to him as if to a king. The commander's heart clenched. Betrayal was no longer a whisper. It had taken form, flesh, and banner. His brother still stood among him in camp, yet the seeds Varian had sown had birthed rebellion in truth. The time of choice had arrived. That night, as the fires burned low, the commander stood before his men. His voice was iron, though his heart trembled. Brothers, the deserters have allied with those who would see us undone. They march under shadow, and their blades will soon strike. We must be steel once more, or we will break entirely. We march to war, not against strangers, but against those who once swore our oath. You will hate this, you will grieve, but you will endure. The men listened, some with eyes of fire, others with shadows of doubt. Kyle stood at his side, his loyalty shining brighter than any flame. Yet across the camp, the commander saw glances exchanged, whispers shared. He wondered how many among them were already lost, how many would falter when the moment came. The valley that had once been their triumph would now be their crucible. And in his heart, the commander knew the Brotherhood would not survive what was to come. The march to the northern ridge was heavy with silence. The Legion moved through broken lands, their armor dulled by dust, their banners torn by wind. The commander rode at their head, every step of his steed echoing the beat of his heart. He could feel the weight of eyes upon him, some filled with faith, others with suspicion, and some already lost to Varian's shadow. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, as though the world waited for the bond of brotherhood to snap. At dawn, they reached the ridge. Beyond it stretched a plain littered with ruins, blackened towers clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. And there, upon that desolate ground, stood the deserters. Their banners were unfamiliar now, their armor darkened, their faces hard with conviction. At their head stood Varian, his figure tall, his gaze unblinking, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. The commander's chest tightened. He rode forward with Kyle at his side, stopping at the edge of the field. Varian stepped to meet him, their armies watching in tense silence. The distance between them felt vast, yet every word would carry across the plain. "You see now," Varian said, his voice calm, almost sorrowful. "The oath is broken. Brotherhood is a chain that has snapped. These men stand with me not because I deceived them, but because they see the truth. Eternity is the only path. Loyalty to flesh and frailty leads only to ruin." The commander's voice was thunder. "You call this truth? You call betrayal destiny? These men once swore as I did, as you did. Their blood was ours, and you would twist that bond into ashes for your own hunger." Varian's eyes gleamed with strange light. "Not hunger, purpose. The whispers are not lies. They show us what is coming. You know it. You feel it as I do. Why deny it? Stand with me, brother, and together we will rise beyond this decay. We will become eternal." Kyle stepped forward, his blade half drawn. "You are no brother of ours. You are a serpent, and serpents are slain." Varian's gaze flicked to him, and for the first time, a shadow of disdain crossed his face. "You will die clinging to an oath that has already crumbled. You will be remembered only as dust beneath eternity's march." The commander raised his hand, halting Kale. His voice carried across the field, heavy with grief and wrath. "You have chosen your path, Varian. You call it eternity. I call it betrayal. There will be no peace between us. When next we meet, it will be as enemies." Varian inclined his head slightly, almost in respect. "So be it. When the battle is done, when the Brotherhood is broken beyond recognition, you will see I was right, and in that moment, you will wish you had stood with me." The parley ended. Varian returned to his ranks, the deserters lifting their blades in silent defiance. The commander turned back to his own men, their faces grim, their spirits trembling between fear and fury. He looked to Kale, and Kyle's eyes met his with unwavering fire. "We stand with you. Whatever comes, we will not falter." The commander nodded, though in his heart he felt the weight of prophecy pressing down. He had seen this battle in his visions, had felt its outcome long before the first blade was drawn. Brotherhood would shatter here, not by the enemy's hand, but by their own. The plain lay silent, awaiting the clash. Above, the clouds gathered once more, thunder rumbling like a dirge. The commander raised his sword to the sky, its edge catching the first flash of lightning, and in the roar of the storm he heard the whispers one final time. Betrayal has begun. Eternity waits. The storm broke as the two armies advanced, lightning splitting the sky in jagged veins of white. Rain fell in sheets, turning the plain into mire, yet neither side faltered. The deserters marched with grim conviction, their banners dark as night, their faces painted with defiance. The legion met them with steel and silence, their blades raised, their eyes haunted by the knowledge that they faced not strangers, but brothers. The commander rode at the front, his sword drawn, the storm reflecting in its edge. For a breath, he wished it were only an enemy they faced, but that wish was gone the moment the first clash rang across the valley. The collision was thunder given flesh. Shields broke, blades screamed, and men who once shed oaths now shed blood. The commander cut his way through the melee, each strike deliberate, each blow a weight upon his soul. He saw faces he knew, warriors who had once laughed beside him, now baring teeth like wolves. Their blades struck at him without hesitation, and with every parry he felt another bond severed. Kyle fought close, his voice rising above the storm, rallying those who wavered. He was everywhere at once, his blade carving arcs of fury, his presence a beacon in the chaos. The commander drew strength from him, even as the vision haunted him, that Kyle's loyalty, so bright, would one day end in blood upon the ground. He pushed it aside, focusing only on the fight before him. The deserters pressed hard, their lines unyielding. They fought not for survival, but for conviction, as though Varian's whispers had filled their veins with fire. Again and again, they hurled themselves against the legion, and again the commander drove them back, though every victory felt hollow. Each time his sword struck, he cut deeper into what once had been his family. Through the clash, he glimpsed Varian, cloaked in shadow, his movements fluid, his blade gleaming like a shard of night. He moved with unnatural grace, untouched by hesitation, his eyes fixed upon the commander even from afar. Their gazes met across the battlefield, and in that instant, the commander knew this war was not between armies, but between them. Hours passed in the chaos, the storm unrelenting. The field became a graveyard of mud and blood, corpses piled where once men had stood shoulder to shoulder. Still the deserters did not break, and still the legion held, each side bleeding, neither yielding. The commander's arm ached, his breath ragged, but he pressed on, refusing to let the weight of despair crush him. Then came the moment he had feared. A cry rose from the right flank, a breach. A cohort faltered, their line broken by deserters who fought with desperate fury. The commander turned, his heart sinking as he saw them driven back, and at their head, blade raised high, fought a captain he once trusted, his voice shouting Varian's name as though it were salvation. The commander drove his steed toward the breach, Kale at his side. They struck into the chaos, cutting down deserters with merciless blows. The captain turned, his eyes wide, as he saw his former lord before him. "It is not betrayal," he roared over the din. "It is truth. Vorian has shown us the way. The commander's blade met his, steel clashing, sparks flying. They fought amidst mud and corpses, their duel drawing the eyes of those around them. The deserters rallied to their captain, the legion to their commander. Each strike was heavy with grief, for this man had once been a brother, a trusted voice. Now he was an enemy. The duel ended with blood. The commander's blade pierced the captain's chest, his cry lost to the storm. The deserters faltered at the sight, their conviction shaking, but the damage was done. The commander stood over the fallen man, rain washing blood from his armor, and in that moment he felt no triumph, only loss. Carl's hand gripped his shoulder, dragging him back into the fray. "There is no time to mourn," Cale shouted. "We must endure." And so they did. The battle raged on, both sides locked in a storm of steel and sorrow. By dusk, the field was a mire of corpses, the storm easing into silence broken only by the cries of the wounded. The deserters withdrew at last, not routed, but retreating in grim order, carrying their dead, their banners still unbroken. They had not been defeated, only delayed. The legion stood battered, diminished, their numbers cut in half. Men looked at one another not with the pride of survival, but with the hollow stare of those who knew victory had lost its meaning. The commander walked among them, his boots sinking into mud, his heart heavy. He had preserved them, but at what cost? The bond that once bound them had been buried beneath the corpses of their own brothers. That night the camp was silent. No songs were sung, no laughter rose. Men sat by fires that barely burned, their eyes fixed on shadows, their hands restless upon blades. The commander stood apart, staring at the dark horizon where Varian's forces had vanished. He knew this was not the end. The deserters would return, stronger, more certain, and each time they struck, more of his own would falter, torn between loyalty and the whispers of eternity. Kyle came to him, his armor dented, his face streaked with blood and exhaustion. Yet his eyes still burned with fire. "We held," he said simply. "That must be enough." The commander shook his head. "It is never enough when we fight ourselves. Every blade I struck today, I struck against my own blood. And still they march, still they believe." Kyle's voice hardened. "Then let them. We will cut them down again and again until none remain. That is what it means to endure. Do not let Varian's poison take root in you." The commander looked at him, at the loyalty that shone like a beacon even in ruin. He wanted to believe, to let Carl's certainty banish the whispers. But when he closed his eyes, he saw again the vision. Cal lying dead, his blood spilled by betrayal, and the whispers echoed, insidious. "He will fall. You cannot save him. Eternity is the only way." He clenched his fists, forcing the voices back. Yet deep inside, he felt the weight of inevitability. The battle had ended, but the war within had only deepened. The Brotherhood was broken, and though they still marched beneath one banner, they no longer marched as one. The storm had passed, but its shadow remained, and in that shadow, the commander knew that the next blow would not come from outside. It would come from within. The days after the battle bled into one another, a march of silence across wasted ground. The legion moved slowly, their numbers thinned, their spirits hollow. What little laughter once flickered among them had been smothered, replaced by whispers too faint to carry, but sharp enough to cut. The commander felt those whispers as keenly as the weight of his sword. Every step forward was shadowed by the memory of brothers turned to enemies, of blood spilled not for conquest, but for betrayal. The plain they crossed was endless and grey, broken only by the skeletal remains of cities long abandoned. Towers leaned like the bones of giants, bridges collapsed into rivers that no longer flowed. The men trudged through these ruins with eyes lowered, as if afraid to meet the gaze of the dead. The commander rode at the head, Karl close beside him. Yet even Karl's presence, so steadfast, so certain, could not shield him from the truth pressing in. Their brotherhood was a ghost now, and ghosts could not hold a line against eternity. At night, when the Legion camped among shattered walls, the whispers grew louder. The commander lay awake, staring at the stars hidden behind cloud and ash. In his dreams, Varian appeared, untouched by time, his gaze filled with pity rather than hate. He reached out a hand, offering not a blade but a crown wrought of shadow and fire. "Take it," the whispers breathed. "Take it, and be free of the burden of command. Let eternity carry what flesh cannot." He always awoke with sweat cold upon his skin, his fists clenched, the promise lingering like poison. Karl saw the weariness deepening in him. One night, as the fires guttered low, Karl spoke plainly. "You are breaking beneath this weight. I see it in your eyes. Do not let him inside you. Varian is no brother now. He is only a shadow. Shadows cannot rule the living unless we grant them shape." The commander met his gaze, his voice hoarse. "And what if the shadow is all that remains of us? What if brotherhood was the lie, and eternity the truth?" Karl's expression hardened, but sorrow gleamed within it. "If that is true, then I would rather die with the lie than live with the truth." The words struck deep, and the commander turned away, unable to answer. 2 nights later, their scouts returned with grim news. Varian's host had not withdrawn into silence. They marched again, growing stronger with each day. The deserters had been joined by others, bands of stragglers, disillusioned mercenaries, even whispers of entire companies of the Legion slipping away under cover of darkness to join him. The shadow was swelling into an army that rivaled their own, and it marched with purpose. The commander called his captains together in the shell of a ruined hall, its roof half collapsed, moonlight cutting through the gaps. The men gathered, their faces pale, their voices low. The debate was fierce, each word edged with fear. "Strike first," one urged. "Meet them before their strength grows further." "No," another countered. "We cannot bleed ourselves again so soon. We must retreat, regroup, wait until the shadow starves itself." And then a third, his voice shaking. "Why fight at all? Why not parley again? Perhaps Varian's truth is not poison, but salvation. Perhaps we cling too tightly to oaths that were never meant to last." The hall erupted, voices clashing like steel. The commander rose, and the sound died, though not with the unity it once carried. His presence no longer silenced with authority, but with the exhaustion of men who no longer wished to argue. "We cannot run," he said, his voice heavy. "If we flee, we scatter, and then we are nothing. We cannot wait, for time only strengthens the shadow. And we cannot surrender, for to do so is to admit that betrayal is destiny. We will meet him again. We will endure." Some nodded, others looked away. Even in his own captains he saw division blooming. That night, Karl remained with him after the others had left. "You spoke well," Karl said, "but I saw the doubt in your eyes. You fear you cannot lead them anymore." The commander's voice broke. "Because I cannot. I carry them, Karl, but every step they drag me deeper into ruin. Each man I lose, each brother who falls or flees, it hollows me. How can I lead when I no longer believe in the road we march?" Karl stepped closer, his hand gripping his arm with unshakable strength. Then borrow my belief until you find your own again. I will not falter, not for you, not for the Legion. You are not alone unless you choose to be. The commander closed his eyes, the words cutting through the storm within him. For a moment, he felt the weight lessen. For a moment, Cale's loyalty held back the whispers, but dawn came, and with it, betrayal anew. A cohort had vanished in the night, their tents empty, their banners gone. They had not deserted into silence, but into Varian's ranks. The camp awoke to fury and grief. Men cursing the names of those who had fled, others whispering that perhaps they had chosen the wiser path. The commander stood before them, his voice carrying across the camp. Those who left are no longer brothers. They have chosen their path, and it is one of shadow. We remain, we endure. Do not think of them as kin, but as foes, and know that when we meet them again, it will be with steel. But even as he spoke, he felt the hollowness of his words. He could see it in their eyes, in the way some nodded with fury while others stared in silence. Brotherhood was not dead, but it was dying, and each betrayal hastened its grave. That night, alone in his tent, the commander prayed for silence. Instead, the whispers came louder than ever. Varian's voice threaded through them, calm, certain, filled not with hatred but with sorrow. You see it now. They will leave you one by one. Cale will fall. You will be left alone carrying ashes. Why cling to chains when eternity waits? Why die for oaths when you could rise beyond them? The commander pressed his hands to his ears, but the words did not cease. He saw visions again. Cale standing against Varian, his sword blazing with loyalty. And then Cale struck down, his lifeblood staining the earth. He saw himself kneeling in the mud, torn between the body of his dearest brother and the hand of Varian reaching down, offering eternity. He wept, though no one saw, for he knew the vision was not warning, but prophecy. The road ahead was narrowing, and soon he would be forced to choose between the last bond of brotherhood and the promise of eternity. When dawn came, the Legion marched again, their numbers fewer, their hearts divided. The commander rode at their head, Cale beside him, Varian's shadow looming ever closer. And though the banners still flew, he knew in his soul they were not the banners of brotherhood any longer. They were the banners of a war that would end with love broken, loyalty betrayed, and only silence left to mark the passing of an empire. The air before the next battle was thick, heavy with the scent of rain that had not yet fallen. Clouds pressed low, dark and swollen, as though the heavens themselves bent to watch the breaking of what remained. The Legion stood upon a ridge of stone, their armour dulled, their banners ragged, their faces etched with weariness and doubt. Below, across the plain, the deserters had gathered with their allies. Their host spread wide, black banners rippling in the wind, torches burning like eyes in the gloom, and at the heart of them stood Varian, tall, unshaken, his gaze fixed upon the ridge as though the outcome was already written. The commander felt the weight of every eye upon him, those who still trusted, those who only followed out of fear, and those who already wondered if Varian's promise was the truer path. He gripped the hilt of his sword, its worn leather biting into his palm. His heart was heavy, yet there was no turning back. The march had ended here. The bond, once a chain of steel, was now a thread frayed to its final strand. Cale stood beside him, fierce and resolute, his blade gleaming even in the dim light. "This is the moment," Cale said. "Not for eternity, not for whispers, but for the oath we swore. We will not falter." The commander wanted to believe. He looked at Cale's face, worn with years of battle yet unbroken, and a sorrow rose in him so deep it nearly stole his breath. For he remembered the visions, the whispers that had shown him Karl's fall. He prayed, in the silence of his heart, that the visions were lies, but he knew lies seldom spoke with such certainty. The horn sounded, a low, mournful note that echoed across the plain. The deserters began to march, their steps thunderous, their voices raised in chants that rolled like waves. The legion answered with their own horn, thinner, strained, yet defiant. The commander raised his sword, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The charge came like a storm. Blades clashed, shields splintered, cries of fury and grief filled the air. Brothers who had once feasted together now struck with merciless strength, each blow driven by conviction that could not be shared. The commander waded into the melee, his sword rising and falling, each stroke carving a path through blood and mud. Yet every face he struck down was a memory. Every body that fell carried the echo of laughter long gone. Karl was ablaze at his side, his fury unrelenting, his voice a roar above the storm. "Hold," he cried, "hold for the oath." Men rallied to him, their blades striking true, their courage renewed by his fire. For a moment, the commander thought they might yet endure. But then Varian came. He moved through the battle like shadow-given flesh, his blade cutting arcs of black light, his presence drawing the deserters into greater frenzy. The men of the legion faltered before him, their eyes wide, their hearts shaken. It was not only his strength, but the certainty in his gaze, the conviction that he was not fighting for survival, but for destiny. The commander saw him across the field, and their eyes locked. Varian lifted his blade in silent challenge, and the whispers surged within the commander's skull, deafening, insistent. "This is the moment. The bond dies here. Choose." The commander forced his way through the press, Kyle at his side. They cut down foes together, the path narrowing, until at last Varian stood before them. Rain began to fall, sharp and cold, hissing against steel. For a heartbeat, the three men stood in silence, the world around them drowned in storm and war. Varian spoke first, his voice calm, even tender. "You see it now. Look, around you. They slaughter each other, brother against brother, oath against oath. And for what? To preserve a bond already broken? End this. Take my hand, and together we can rise beyond this ruin. Kale will not understand, but he is already lost." Kale's blade snapped up, his eyes blazing. "Do not listen. He is no brother. He is death wearing a familiar face. Strike him now, and end his poison." The commander's heart tore within him. He looked at Varian, and in his eyes he saw certainty, the promise of release from the endless burden of command. He looked at Kel and saw loyalty so fierce it burned like a star, a loyalty that demanded sacrifice even unto death. Between them, he felt himself unravel. Then Varian moved. His blade swept toward Kale, quick as lightning. Kel met it with his own, steel ringing through the storm. The two clashed, sparks flying, each strike shuddering with the weight of belief. The commander staggered back, torn between them, his heart pounding with the memory of the vision. Kyle struck down in blood, Varian standing eternal. "Strike him," Kyle shouted, his voice hoarse with effort. "End this before it is too late." But Varian's voice was a whisper threaded with thunder. "Do not strike. Stand with me, and the burden ends. Eternity is yours." The battle raged around them, but in that moment, the world narrowed to the clash of two blades, to the choice that split the commander's soul. He raised his sword, torn between the two paths, each one a betrayal of the other. His arm shook, his breath ragged. Kyle faltered for the briefest instant, a slip in the mud, and Varian's blade struck deep across his side. Blood spilled bright in the storm. Kyle staggered, but still he fought, his face twisted in pain yet defiant. The commander's heart cracked. He saw the vision made flesh, the prophecy unfolding. Varian pressed forward, his blade driving Kale to his knees. "Now," Varian said, his voice low but commanding. "Now you see. He cannot endure. None of them can. Only eternity remains. Take it, brother. Take it, and be free." Kale's eyes found the commander's, fierce even through the pain. "Do not falter," he rasped. Strike him now, or all we swore dies with me." The commander stood frozen, the storm raging, his sword heavy in his hand. Love tore at him from both sides. Love for Kyle, unshakable in loyalty. Love for Varian, once brother and now shadow. He felt the whispers clawing at his mind, urging him toward eternity, urging him to abandon the fragile chains of flesh. He felt Kale's voice anchoring him, demanding he remember the oath. The choice pressed upon him with the weight of worlds. His sword lifted, trembling, every heartbeat echoing like thunder. The storm roared, and the plain was drenched in blood. And in that terrible instant, the commander knew the bond of brotherhood had reached its breaking. Whatever he chose, the end would come. He raised his blade, and the world held its breath. The storm had broken fully, rain lashing the battlefield in sheets that turned earth to mud, blood to slurry. Thunder rolled across the valley like the laughter of an unseen god, and lightning illuminated the devastation in jagged bursts. The legion was scattered, their lines broken, their banners slashed by wind and steel. Corpses littered the plain, friend and foe indistinguishable beneath the mud, beneath the shadow of betrayal. The commander rode through it all, his armor streaked with crimson and rain, his sword heavy, his heart heavier still. Kyle lay before him, a broken pillar of loyalty. His side was torn, his armor pierced, his breath shallow. He met the commander's gaze with eyes alight not with fear, but with defiance. "Do not falter," he rasped. "Do not let him claim you, as he did us." The words were wet with blood, but the conviction burned bright. Kyle's hand fell from his hilt, and the commander knew in that instant that the last anchor of his brotherhood had been shattered. Varian approached through the storm, his cloak torn, his blade unbroken, his eyes alight with certainty. He moved as though the rain could not touch him, as though the chaos around him existed only to highlight his presence. The men who followed him advanced in silence, their loyalty absolute, their swords ready. The commander's throat tightened. He saw in them the embodiment of every whisper he had ever heard, every promise of eternity that had haunted his nights. "You see now," Varian said, his voice cutting through the storm. "All that you clung to has fallen away. Kyle lies broken. The men tremble. And yet you hesitate. Why, brother? Do you cling to loyalty even when it is gone? Do you deny what is inevitable?" The commander's hands shook upon his blade. He felt the weight of the past, the oath sworn beneath dying stars, the laughter of men now silent, the warmth of bonds that had been scorched in fire. And he felt the whispering of eternity, fierce and insistent, pressing into his mind like a tide that would not recede. "Because," he said, voice hoarse, "even in ruin, we do not surrender ourselves. Even when betrayal stains the air, I will not let it claim me." Varian's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, there was no pity there, only the cold fire of certainty. "Then you will die with it," he said, and advanced. The commander raised his blade, stepping between Varian and what remained of the legion. The rain hissed as it struck steel, the mud gripping boots and hooves alike. Around them, men struggled to their feet, eyes wide with fear and grief, blades raised, yet many stayed frozen, unsure whom to strike, unsure whom to trust. The battlefield was chaos incarnate, and within it, the final confrontation had come. Kyle's blood pooled beneath him, yet he struggled to rise, every motion a battle against pain and gravity. He looked at the commander, his lips moving through no sound came through the storm. The commander understood. Kyle's loyalty, though broken in body, had not faltered in will, and in that resolve he drew a deep, shuddering breath. The first clash came swift and violent. Varian's blade met the commander's with a ringing scream of steel, a strike that carried the weight of betrayal and the promise of eternity. Sparks flew, rain hissed, and mud exploded under their boots. Each blow was a memory made flesh, each parry a measure of every oath now broken. Around them, the legion and deserters fought, but their cries were drowned by thunder, by lightning, by the clash of what was once brotherhood now turned to ruin. Varian's strikes were precise, almost cruel in their perfection. The commander's blade met each one, each clash tearing at his body and soul alike. He felt Carl's presence behind him, felt the unspoken challenge, endure, or let all fall. And he endured, though every motion brought him closer to exhaustion, closer to the edge where grief and rage would overwhelm him. The storm intensified, and with it, the whispers. They came not as voices but as visions. Kyle's fall, the legions scattering, eternity unclaimed unless he yielded. They clawed at his mind, urging, pressing, relentless. He blocked them with steel, with will, with the last fragments of loyalty that remained within him. Varian pressed harder, driving the commander back across the field. With each retreat, the commander felt the weight of every brother lost, every oath betrayed, every dream of unity crushed beneath the mud and rain. And yet he did not yield. Not yet. Not until the end. In the midst of the storm, Kel cried out, his voice raw, yet defiant. Now, brother, end him, before eternity claims more than it already has. The commander's eyes met Kale's, and in that instant, the choice became clear. Not for eternity, not for whispers, not for power beyond comprehension, but for the bond that had once been, for the memory of all they had been together. He lunged, steel singing, meeting Varian's blade in a strike that reverberated across the valley. Sparks leapt, rain hissed, and the ground trembled beneath the collision. The duel stretched, each strike heavy with history, each parry laden with grief. Varian's face was calm, but his eyes betrayed the first flicker of doubt. The commander's rage was not born of ambition, but of loss, of memory, of the desperate hope to preserve the fragments of brotherhood that still lingered. And in that fire, he found strength. Finally, with a surge of will, the commander struck true. His blade cut through the rain, through steel, and through the certainty in Varian's eyes. Varian faltered, staggered, and fell to one knee, the storm roaring around him, echoing the collapse of all he had built. Kyle's voice rose then, triumphant and mournful at once. "It is done," he shouted, though his breath was shallow. "You have endured. The Legion survives." The commander stood over Varian, chest heaving, rain washing blood and mud from his armor. He saw the storm mirrored in his enemy's eyes, saw the shadow of eternity he had offered, now extinguished. And yet, victory felt hollow. Brother had fallen, loyalty had been tested, and the weight of all that had transpired pressed down upon him like the heavens themselves. He looked around the field, at the men who had survived, at the corpses of those who had once been brothers, at the shattered banners, at the rain-soaked mud. The battle was won, but the war had left scars that would not heal. The Legion remained, but their hearts bore the memory of betrayal, of blood, of choices that would haunt them until the end of their days. The commander sheathed his blade, the storm easing into a murmur, the thunder rolling away like distant drums. He knelt beside Carl, whose breaths came in shallow gasps. "We endure," he whispered, "because we must, because it is all that remains." Carl's hand lifted weakly to touch his shoulder, a silent vow that even in ruin, even in loss, loyalty could survive. And in that touch, fleeting yet eternal, the commander found the last spark of what he had fought for, a fragment of brotherhood, fragile but unbroken, rising from the ashes of betrayal. The rain ceased, the sky cleared, revealing stars dimmed by the storm but still steadfast. The commander rose, his armor scarred, his soul heavier than ever, yet his eyes fixed upon the horizon where the dawn waited. Eternity had not claimed him. The Legion had survived, and though the cost had been immeasurable, the final choice had been made. The battlefield lay silent, a graveyard etched in mud and blood beneath the pale light of dawn. The storm had passed, leaving only the residue of chaos, shattered banners, broken armor, bodies frozen in the agony of their last breath. The plain stretched endless, a testament to the cost of choices made, to bonds shattered, to eternity deferred. The commander stood at its center, his armor streaked with rain and blood, his sword hanging heavy at his side. Around him the Legion gathered, their faces etched with grief and exhaustion, the memory of battle etched into every line. Carl lay propped against a fractured wall, his injuries grievous, but his eyes alive with the faint fire of life. He looked up at the commander, a faint smile breaking through the pain. "It is over," he whispered. "We endured. We survived. And yet..." His voice trailed, heavy with meaning, as though he could feel the absence of those who would never rise again. The commander knelt beside him, pressing a hand to Cale's shoulder. "We survived," he said quietly, though the words felt hollow in the expanse of ruin around them. "But at what cost, brother? Every oath, every bond. We paid for them in blood." Cale's lips moved, faint and deliberate. "And yet you led us, even when the whispers tore at your soul, even when the shadow of eternity threatened to claim you. You chose loyalty over power. That alone is more than many could endure." His hand fell from the commander's shoulder. "Rest now. You have earned it, though the world will not remember the price." The commander rose, surveying the battlefield. Deserters had been driven off. Varian was gone, his shadow dissipated like mist under the rising sun. Yet the echoes of his presence lingered, in the eyes of men, in the hollowed laughter of the wounded, in the whispers that had never fully ceased. The cost of leadership had been written in crimson across the plain. Every step he had taken, every choice he had made, had led here to survival, yes, but survival steeped in loss. He walked among the men, their gazes following him with a mixture of awe and sorrow. Some still clutched broken swords, others stared at the ground, haunted by the faces of brothers fallen by blade and betrayal. He saw in them what he saw in himself. Endurance born of necessity, not triumph. Loyalty tested beyond comprehension, leaving scars deeper than any wound of steel. The wind rose then, carrying with it the scent of rain and mud, the faint smoke of fires left to burn as memorials. He thought of Varian and the path not taken, the promise of eternity that had beckoned, tempting, relentless. He could still hear the whispers, faint now, threads of shadow that no longer held power over him. He had chosen, and the weight of that choice would stay with him for the rest of his days. Kyle struggled to stand, leaning on the commander for support. "We rebuild," he said. "We gather what remains. The Legion is not whole, but it endures, and perhaps that is enough." The commander nodded, though the ache in his chest would not ease. "Enough is all we can ask for," he said. The rest belongs to memory and to those who fell." They moved through the remnants of the battlefield, walking over what had been, over what would never be again. Soldiers lay scattered, faces frozen in terror, determination, or despair. The commander did not flinch at their sight, for he had seen it all in visions, in whispers, in the mirror of his own soul. Each body was a testament to the choices that had been made, the oaths that had been kept or broken, the betrayals that had cleaved brother from brother. By midday, the survivors gathered upon a ridge overlooking the valley. The sun had risen higher now, spilling light across the plain, illuminating the wreckage. The commander's gaze lingered on the horizon, where distant mountains rose like guardians of a world still unclaimed. He felt the burden of command ease slightly, though the ache of loss remained, gnawing at him like the memory of 1,000 storms. He addressed the men, his voice carrying across the silent field. "Look upon what has passed, not as victory, not as glory, but as truth. We endured because we held fast to what remained. The bond of brotherhood has been tested and broken, yet, in its fragments, we found the strength to survive. Remember them. Remember what we lost, and remember that even in ruin, we endure." The men listened, some nodding, some silent, all marked by the weight of his words. They had fought, they had survived, and in that survival lay a measure of triumph, though it was tempered by sorrow. The commander felt it in every gaze upon him. Respect, fear, grief, and hope intertwined like the threads of a tapestry burned in fire. The horizon darkened slightly as clouds rolled in again, not with rain this time, but with the quiet weight of twilight. The commander stood alone for a moment, the wind carrying the whispers faintly now, a reminder of what had been offered and what had been rejected. Eternity had called, and he had chosen the burdens of mortality, the fragile bonds of loyalty, the weight of leadership that demanded sacrifice without promise of reward. He lowered his sword, letting it rest against the earth. The mud of the battlefield clung to him, but he did not move it aside. Every stain, every cut, every drop of blood was a record of the journey, a testament to endurance, to loss, to survival. He felt the eyes of his men upon him, but he did not seek their praise. There was nothing to be praised, only endured, only remembered. Kyle leaned against him, breathing shallow, and offered a faint smile. "We have survived," he said. The cost is written in the field, but we endure, and perhaps that is enough for those who remain." The commander nodded again, his gaze lingering on the rising stars beginning to pierce the evening sky. He knew this peace was fragile, temporary, but it was theirs, and in it he found the faintest measure of solace. The echoes of betrayal would linger, the shadows of Varian would never fully fade, but the living remained, and they would bear the memory, the scars, the lessons into the future. He breathed deeply, rain and mud and blood mixing on his skin, and felt the weight of eternity lift slightly from his mind. Not because he had claimed it, not because it had been denied, but because he had chosen the path of loyalty, of humanity, of survival tempered by sorrow. In that choice lay the final truth. The empire may crumble, brotherhood may fracture, But endurance is eternal in its own right. The men began to gather their dead, tending to the wounded, rebuilding what little could be salvaged. The commander walked among them, his presence quiet, his gaze steady. No words of triumph passed his lips. No songs of glory rose. There was only the heavy rhythm of survival, the slow, measured march of life forward, step by step, blade by blade, heart by heart. And in that silence, beneath the pale light of stars and the first breath of evening wind, the commander understood fully the cost of what had been endured, the weight of what had been chosen, and the depth of what it meant to survive when Brotherhood had fallen. Eternity had waited. He had denied it, but in doing so, he had carried the living through the storm of betrayal, and in that, he had found the truest victory of all. The battlefield was quiet now, the echoes of war fading into memory, and the commander, weary and bloodied, stood among what remained of the legion, watching the horizon where the sun would set on an age of loss and rise again on a world still theirs to bear.